The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Council Bluffs, Iowa, in the summer of 1878, causing Hannah Kirkwood to clutch her worn carpetbag tighter as she stepped off the stagecoach. Another shot rang out, followed by raucous laughter from the saloon. Hannah pulled her 3 exhausted children closer, their small faces pinched with fear and fatigue after the grueling journey west. She had exactly $17 to her name, a teaching certificate, and the desperate hope that the frontier town's advertisement for a schoolteacher hadn't been filled in the 6 weeks it had taken them to travel from Philadelphia. "Stay close," Hannah whispered to 10-year-old Sarah, who held the hands of 6-year-old Thomas and 4-year-old Emma. The children's clothes were travel-stained, their faces smudged with dirt from the long journey, but Hannah had made sure they remained as presentable as possible. First impressions mattered, especially when you were starting over with nothing. The western sun beat down mercilessly as Hannah surveyed the town. Council Bluffs wasn't the rough-hewn collection of hastily constructed buildings she'd feared. Being positioned on the eastern side of the Missouri River, it served as an important jumping-off point for settlers heading further west, giving it a more established feel than she'd expected. Still, it was a far cry from Philadelphia's orderly streets and familiar comforts. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Emma whimpered, her small hand tugging at Hannah's skirt. "Soon, sweetheart," Hannah promised, trying to locate the town hall where she hoped to find the mayor who had placed the advertisement for a teacher. A commotion erupted from the saloon as 2 men burst through the batwing doors, locked in a violent struggle. One man threw a punch that sent the other stumbling backward into the street, directly into Hannah's path. She gasped, pulling her children behind her as the man crashed to the ground, his hat tumbling off to reveal a shock of dark hair. "You cheating snake," bellowed the man still standing in the doorway of the saloon. "Nobody deals from the bottom in my establishment." The fallen man rolled to his feet with surprising agility, revealing a handsome face with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. His piercing blue eyes briefly met Hannah's startled gaze before returning to his adversary. "I don't cheat, Maxwell," he said in a deep, steady voice that carried across the street. "You're just a poor loser." The saloon owner Maxwell drew his pistol with alarming speed. "I'll show you who's the loser, Lawson." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest as she shielded her children, but before Maxwell could fire, another man stepped between them, an older gentleman with a silver star pinned to his vest. "That's enough, Maxwell," the sheriff said firmly. "Put that gun away before I have to lock you up again." Maxwell glowered but holstered his weapon. "Keep that drifter out of my place, Sheriff. He's not welcome." As Maxwell retreated into the saloon, the man called Lawson brushed dust from his clothes and retrieved his hat. Now that the danger had passed, Hannah got a better look at him. He wasn't dressed like the other cowboys she'd seen. His clothes were well worn but of good quality dark trousers, a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, and a leather vest. A gun belt sat low on his hips, but there was something refined about him that suggested he hadn't always lived on the frontier. "You all right, madam?" the sheriff asked Hannah, tipping his hat. "Sorry about that unpleasantness. Not the best welcome to Council Bluffs." "We're fine, thank you," Hannah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm looking for Mayor Wilson's office. I've come about the teaching position." The sheriff's weathered face broke into a smile. "Well now, that's good news. We've been waiting on a teacher for some time. The mayor's office is just down the street, that 2-story building with the green door." "Thank you," Hannah said, gathering her children closer. "Name's Sheriff Douglas, by the way, and you are Hannah Kirkwood. These are my children Sarah, Thomas, and Emma." The man called Lawson had been dusting off his hat, but at the mention of her name, he looked up with interest. "You've come a long way to teach in our little town," he observed, his voice carrying a hint of an educated Eastern accent that surprised Hannah. "Philadelphia," she confirmed, unable to resist the direct gaze of those blue eyes, even as she reminded herself to be cautious around strange men, especially ones who got into fights in saloons. "Lucas Remington," he said, extending his hand. "I apologize for the spectacle. Not all of Council Bluffs is as unwelcoming as Maxwell." Hannah hesitantly shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work despite his refined manner. "Mr. Remington, most folks just call me Luke," he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. Sheriff Douglas cleared his throat. "Luke here is our local ranch foreman at the Double R when he's not getting himself thrown out of saloons." Luke's smile turned rueful. "A rare occurrence, I assure you." Hannah nodded politely but took a step back, placing a protective hand on Thomas's shoulder. "If you'll excuse us, I should speak with the mayor before it gets too late. Children, come along." As she guided her tired children down the street, Hannah felt Luke Remington's gaze following her. There was something unsettling about the man, not threatening, exactly, but intense in a way that made her pulse quicken. She couldn't afford distractions. She had 3 children depending on her, and securing this teaching position was all that mattered now. Mayor Wilson was a round-faced man with bushy side whiskers and an eager manner. His relief at seeing Hannah was palpable. "Mrs. Kirkwood, what a pleasure to finally meet you. We received your letter months ago and had almost given up hope," he exclaimed, ushering her into his office and calling for his secretary to bring tea and cookies for the children. Hannah settled her exhausted children on a wooden bench before taking a seat across from the mayor's desk. "I apologize for the delay. There were complications before our departure." She didn't elaborate on those complications: her husband's gambling debts, his sudden death from pneumonia, the creditors who had stripped their home of everything of value. The shame of it still burned. No matter. You're here now," Mayor Wilson said genially. "The school has been without a teacher since Miss Abernathy married a cattle baron and moved to Wyoming last fall. The town council approved your application on the strength of your credentials. When can you start?" "Immediately," Hannah said, relief washing over her. "Though I'll need to find suitable lodgings first." "Already arranged, my dear lady. The schoolhouse has attached living quarters, modest but clean and furnished. Previous teachers have found it quite comfortable." He named a salary that was less than she'd earned in Philadelphia, but would be sufficient if she was careful. "There is one thing," Mayor Wilson added, his expression growing serious. "The school has fallen into some disrepair during the vacancy. Nothing dangerous, mind you, but it needs a thorough cleaning and some minor repairs before the term begins. The town council has allocated funds for materials, but labor is scarce with harvest approaching." "I see," Hannah said, her heart sinking slightly. She had hoped to start teaching and earning immediately. "I can help with the cleaning," Sarah offered quietly, always the responsible one. Mayor Wilson beamed at the girl. "What a helpful young lady, but I'm afraid it's more than a bit of dusting. The roof has a leak that needs patching. Some windows need reglazing, and there's a nest of raccoons that have taken up residence in the bell tower." Hannah fought to keep her expression composed. She knew nothing about patching roofs or reglazing windows, let alone evicting raccoons. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Lucas Remington appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. His eyes found Hannah's for a brief moment before addressing the mayor. "Pardon the interruption, Mayor. Mrs. Flores sent me to fetch the mail before I head back to the ranch." "Of course, Luke. It's on my secretary's desk." Mayor Wilson turned back to Hannah with a sudden gleam in his eye. Actually, Mr. Remington, you've arrived at a fortuitous moment. This is Mrs. Kirkwood, our new school teacher. Luke nodded. We've met briefly. Excellent. Then you're aware of our good fortune in securing such a qualified educator for our children. However, Mrs. Kirkwood has just learned of the school's condition. Understanding dawned in Luke's eyes. The raccoons still holding their ground, are they? Among other issues, the mayor confirmed. I was just explaining that we have funds for materials, but are short on labor. Hannah saw where this was heading and felt her cheeks warm. I wouldn't want to impose on anyone's generosity. I'm sure I can manage. Nonsense, Mayor Wilson interrupted. Luke here is the most capable handyman in the county when he's not busy at the Double R. Isn't that right, Luke? Luke seemed to consider this for a moment, his eyes returning to Hannah's face with that same intensity she'd noticed earlier. I could spare a few days before roundup starts, he finally said. If Mrs. Kirkwood has no objections. Hannah hesitated. She needed help, that much was obvious, but accepting it from this stranger made her uncomfortable. Yet what choice did she have? That would be most appreciated, Mr. Remington, she said formally. First light tomorrow, then, Luke said with a nod. I'll bring tools. As he turned to leave, little Emma, who had been quietly eating a cookie, spoke up. Are you going to fix our house, mister? Luke paused, a genuine smile softening his features as he addressed the child. That's the plan, little miss. Make it right and proper for you and your family. Thank you, Emma said solemnly, offering him her half-eaten cookie. Luke hesitated, then gently declined. That's mighty kind, but you enjoy that. You've had a long journey. After he departed, Mayor Wilson arranged for the town's only hotel to provide Hannah and the children a room for the night, free of charge. A welcome gift from the town, he explained. Tomorrow, once you've seen the school, you can decide if the living quarters will suffice. That evening, after bathing the children and tucking them into the hotel's clean beds, Hannah stood by the window, looking out at the unfamiliar town. Council Bluffs was more developed than she'd expected, with proper buildings rather than ramshackle structures, yet it was still worlds away from Philadelphia. The streets were unpaved, horses and wagons outnumbered people, and the distant howl of what might have been a coyote reminded her just how far west they'd traveled. Would they find happiness here? Could she truly make a new start, so far from everything familiar? Hannah pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching as a lone figure walked down the street, a tall man with a distinctive gait that she somehow knew belonged to Lucas Remington. What kind of man are you? She whispered, watching until he disappeared from view. Tomorrow would bring her first test as a frontier woman. She needed to be strong for her children's sake. When dawn broke over Council Bluffs, Hannah was already awake, preparing her children for the day ahead. Sarah helped Emma dress while Hannah braided their hair, and Thomas, trying his best to be the man of the family, polished everyone's shoes with a cloth provided by the hotel. Will we like it here, Mama? Sarah asked quietly as Hannah fastened the girl's hair ribbon. Hannah met her daughter's solemn gaze in the mirror. Sarah had grown up too quickly since her father's death, becoming more helper than child. I believe we will, sweetheart. It's different, but different can be good, and you'll make new friends once school begins. What if the other children don't like us because we talk differently? Thomas worried, his Philadelphia accent indeed standing out among the frontier dialects they'd encountered. They'll like you because you're kind and smart, Hannah assured him. Accents don't matter when you're choosing friends. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mayor Wilson, who had offered to escort them to the schoolhouse. To Hannah's surprise, Lucas Remington was with him, a wagon waiting outside. Good morning, Mrs. Kirkwood, the mayor greeted cheerfully. I thought a wagon would be more comfortable than walking, especially for the little ones. Luke nodded politely, his expression unreadable as he took in the family. He looked different this morning, clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing a fresh shirt under his leather vest. The gun belt was still present, but somehow less prominent in the morning light. "Thank you for your thoughtfulness," Hannah replied, gathering their few belongings. Luke stepped forward to take their carpetbag, his hand briefly touching hers in the exchange. The contact, though fleeting, sent an unexpected warmth through her fingers. The ride to the schoolhouse took them through the awakening town and a short distance beyond, where the buildings gave way to scattered homesteads. The schoolhouse itself stood on a gentle rise, a simple white clapboard building with a small bell tower. Next to it was a modest cottage that Hannah presumed would be their new home. Her heart sank as they drew closer. The schoolhouse's paint was peeling, shutters hung askew, and a section of the roof clearly sagged. The cottage looked equally neglected, with overgrown weeds surrounding it and a broken porch step. Luke must have noticed her dismay. "Looks worse than it is," he said quietly as he helped her down from the wagon. "Good bones to both buildings, just need some care." Mayor Wilson led them on a tour, his optimistic descriptions contrasting sharply with the reality before them. The schoolroom was spacious enough, with rows of desks facing a teacher's platform, but dust lay thick on every surface. Bird droppings stained the floor beneath broken windows, and the unmistakable smell of animals lingered in the air. The attached cottage was similarly distressed: 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a sitting area, all in need of thorough cleaning. The furniture was sparse but serviceable: beds without mattresses, a table with mismatched chairs, an old cookstove that Mayor Wilson assured her worked perfectly well. "The town will provide mattresses, of course," the mayor said hurriedly, noting Hannah's expression as she surveyed what would be their home. "And linens. Mrs. Douglas at the general store has put together some kitchen essentials as a welcome gift." Hannah forced a smile. "It's very generous." "The cottage has potential. It has a pump in the kitchen," Luke pointed out, demonstrating by working the handle until water flowed. "Indoor water is a luxury out here, and there's a proper privy out back, not just an outhouse." Hannah nodded, trying to see the positives. The cottage was larger than their cramped Philadelphia apartment after they'd been forced to downsize. The land around it was open, with wildflowers dotting the prairie grass, a far cry from the smoky, confined city streets. And despite its condition, it would be theirs alone, not shared with other desperate families as their last residence had been. "How soon do you think it can be made habitable?" she asked Luke directly. He considered the question seriously. "The cottage could be ready by nightfall if we focus there first. The schoolhouse will take longer, a week, maybe more, depending on what we find in that bell tower." "A week?" Hannah exclaimed before she could stop herself. "School should be starting soon." "We've delayed the start of term until September 1st, Mayor Wilson explained. "That gives us nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks without income," Hannah calculated silently. Her meager savings would be stretched thin. "If you're willing to help with the cleaning and lighter repairs," Luke suggested, "we could have the school ready sooner." "Of course," Hannah agreed quickly. "The children and I aren't afraid of hard work." Luke's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "No, I don't imagine you are." Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. "Excellent. Then it's settled. I'll leave you in Luke's capable hands while I attend to town business. The materials should arrive this afternoon." After the mayor departed, an awkward silence fell. Hannah was acutely aware that she was alone with a man she barely knew, miles from town, with only her children as companions. Yet something told her Lucas Remington could be trusted, despite his saloon altercation the previous day. "Perhaps we should start with clearing out this room," she suggested, moving toward the kitchen. "The children and I can clean while you assess what repairs are needed most urgently." Luke nodded. "Fair plan. I brought some tools and supplies in the wagon." He turned to the children, who had been unusually quiet during the inspection. "Would you young'uns like to help me unload? There might be a surprise for helpful hands." Thomas and Emma eagerly followed him outside while Sarah stayed behind with Hannah. "What do you think of him, Mama?" Sarah asked softly as they began clearing cobwebs from the corners. Hannah considered the question. "Mr. Remington seems capable. We're fortunate he's willing to help." "He looks at you in a special way," Sarah observed with the directness of a 10-year-old. Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "That's nonsense, Sarah. He's simply being polite." "Papa never looked at you that way," Sarah persisted, "even before he got sick." Hannah's heart clenched at the mention of her late husband. James Kirkwood had been a handsome man and a charming companion when they'd married 12 years ago. But his charm had concealed a weakness for gambling and drink that had gradually eroded their happiness. By the time he died, their marriage had been a hollow shell, maintained for the children's sake. "That's enough, Sarah," Hannah said firmly. "Mr. Remington is helping us because the mayor asked him to, nothing more. Now, let's see if we can make this kitchen serviceable." Outside, she could hear Luke's deep voice explaining something to Thomas, followed by her son's excited questions. Emma's delighted giggle floated through the open window. For all his intimidating presence, the man seemed to have a way with children. By mid-morning, they had established a rhythm. Hannah and Sarah cleaned the cottage while Luke tackled the structural issues, with Thomas eagerly assisting by handing him tools. Emma flitted between helping her mother and watching the men work, her natural charm already winning Luke's affection. Shortly before noon, a wagon arrived with the promised supplies: lumber, shingles, glass panes, mattresses, linens, and a crate of groceries. The driver also delivered a note from Mrs. Douglas inviting Hannah and the children to dinner that evening, to welcome Council Bluffs' newest residents properly. Luke helped unload everything, then disappeared into the bell tower to assess the raccoon situation. He emerged covered in dust but triumphant. "They've moved on," he reported. "Left a mess, but nothing that can't be cleaned up. The roof's another matter that leaks worse than it looks from inside." Hannah wiped her brow, leaving a smudge of dirt across her forehead. The kitchen was now clean enough to use, though the rest of the cottage remained in disarray. "Should we prioritize the roof then?" Luke's eyes lingered on the smudge, his hand half raising as if to brush it away before he caught himself. "The cottage roof first. It's sound except for that corner over the kitchen. We'll need to replace some shingles before tonight in case it rains." Hannah nodded. "I should start preparing lunch. You must be hungry after all this work." "No need," Luke said quickly. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense. You're working without pay to help us. The least I can offer is a meal." Luke seemed about to argue further when Emma tugged at his hand. "Mama makes the best sandwiches," she informed him solemnly. "Even when we only had a little bread." Something flickered across Luke's face, understanding, perhaps, or respect. "Well, in that case I accept." While Hannah assembled simple sandwiches from the provisions Mrs. Douglas had sent, Luke worked with Thomas to draw water from the pump and fill the large wash basin. The boy chattered away, asking endless questions about ranch life that Luke answered with surprising patience. "Mr. Remington says I can visit his ranch someday," Thomas announced as they gathered around the newly cleaned kitchen table. "He has horses and cows and even a real bunkhouse where the cowboys sleep." Hannah glanced at Luke, who looked slightly embarrassed. I hope that's all right, Mrs. Kirkwood. The double R is only about 5 miles west. Children often come out to see the animals. Perhaps when we're more settled, Hannah said noncommittally. And please call me Hannah. Mrs. Kirkwood makes me feel like one of my former teachers. Luke's smile transformed his face, erasing the hard lines around his eyes. Hannah, then. And I meant what I said, you'd all be welcome at the ranch anytime. Mrs. Flores, our housekeeper, loves visitors, especially children. You live in the bunkhouse with the other cowboys? Sarah asked, her natural curiosity overcoming her initial shyness. Luke chuckled. No, I have a small cabin near the main house. As foreman, I get a few privileges. How did you become a foreman? Hannah asked, genuinely interested. There was something about Luke Remington that didn't fit the typical cowboy mold. A shadow crossed his face. Long story. Came west after the war, worked my way up from ranch hand. The owner, Mr. Reeves, took a liking to me, I suppose. The war. That would explain the haunted look that sometimes appeared in his eyes. So many men had come west to escape those memories. Were you an officer? Thomas asked eagerly. Did you fight in battles? Thomas, Hannah chided gently. That's not an appropriate question for the dinner table. It's all right, Luke said, though his expression had grown guarded. Yes, I was an officer, lieutenant in the Union Army, but that was a long time ago. The conversation shifted to safer topics: the upcoming school term, the children they might expect as students, the town's annual harvest festival in October. Luke gradually relaxed again, and Hannah found herself enjoying his company more than she'd anticipated. He was intelligent and well-spoken, with an unexpected dry humor that emerged when he was comfortable. After lunch, they returned to work with renewed energy. Luke and Thomas began replacing the damaged shingles on the cottage roof, while Hannah, Sarah, and Emma continued cleaning and arranging their meager belongings. By late afternoon, the cottage had been transformed from a dusty, abandoned shell into something approaching a home. The floors were swept, windows washed, and fresh linens adorned the beds. Luke had repaired the broken furniture, fixed the leaking roof, and even fashioned a small shelf for Emma's treasured doll collection. It looks like a different place, Hannah marveled as they gathered in the small sitting room to assess their progress. The cottage was still sparse, but it was clean and sound, a place where they could build a new life. Luke nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes as he surveyed their work. Amazing what a little effort can accomplish. We'll start on the schoolhouse tomorrow. I can't thank you enough for all you've done today, Hannah said sincerely. We couldn't have managed this alone. Happy to help, Luke replied, his voice gruff with an emotion Hannah couldn't quite identify. I should head back to the ranch before dark. I'll return in the morning. As he gathered his tools, Emma approached him with a small, wilted wildflower she'd picked earlier. This is for you, she said, offering it with solemn ceremony, because you fixed our home. Luke knelt to accept the gift, treating it with the same gravity as if she'd handed him a priceless treasure. Thank you, Miss Emma. I'll keep it safe. Hannah's heart twisted unexpectedly at the scene. Emma barely remembered her father. She'd been just 2 when James died. To see her daughter offering such a gesture of trust to a man they'd known less than a day stirred complicated feelings. We'll see you at Mrs. Douglas's for dinner, Hannah asked as Luke straightened. He hesitated. I wasn't invited. Oh. Hannah felt unexpectedly disappointed. Well then. Tomorrow morning, Luke nodded, placing his hat on his head. First light. After he left, the cottage seemed strangely empty despite the presence of 3 active children. Hannah shook off the feeling and helped her family prepare for their dinner engagement, grateful for the chance to meet more of the townsfolk, who would soon be entrusting their children to her care. Mrs. Douglas proved to be a gracious hostess, and the evening introduced Hannah to several prominent families of Council Bluffs. She learned that the town had grown significantly since the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad 10 years earlier, though it remained small compared to eastern cities. The people were welcoming, curious about her background but not prying into the circumstances that had brought a widow and 3 children so far west. "You'll find most folks here mind their own business," Sheriff Douglas told her as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "Fresh starts are something we all understand in these parts." Hannah was grateful for that philosophy. She had no desire to explain James's gambling debts or the humiliating circumstances of their final months in Philadelphia. "Luke Remington is helping repair the schoolhouse," she mentioned, trying to sound casual. "He seems very capable." Several knowing glances passed between the adults at the table. "Luke's one of the best men in the county," Mrs. Douglas affirmed. "Keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a person in trouble he wouldn't help. Served with distinction in the war," her husband added, "though he doesn't talk about it much." "Such a shame about his family," another woman murmured. Hannah's curiosity was piqued, but before she could ask for clarification, Mrs. Douglas smoothly changed the subject. "How are your children settling in, Mrs. Kirkwood? It must be quite an adjustment after city life." By the time they returned to their cottage, guided by Sheriff Douglas with a lantern, Hannah was too tired to dwell on the mysterious comment about Luke's family. Tomorrow would bring another day of hard work, and she needed rest. Yet as she lay in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the prairie, her thoughts returned to Lucas Remington. There was more to the quiet foreman than met the eye, a depth of character that intrigued her despite her determination to focus solely on establishing security for her children. "I didn't come west to find a man," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "I came to build a new life for my family." But as sleep finally claimed her, Hannah couldn't help wondering what tragedy lay in Lucas Remington's past, and why the thought of him returning in the morning brought a small, unbidden flutter to her heart. True to his word, Luke arrived at first light, this time with a young ranch hand to assist with the heavier work at the schoolhouse. Over breakfast, a simple meal of porridge that Hannah insisted he join them for, Luke introduced Miguel, a cheerful Mexican youth of about 18 who spoke English with a musical accent. "Miguel's the best with what I've ever seen," Luke explained as the young man bashfully ducked his head at the praise. "Taught him basic carpentry when he first came to the ranch, and now he teaches me new tricks." The day established what would become their routine for the next week. Luke and Miguel tackled the structural repairs while Hannah and the children cleaned, organized, and helped with whatever tasks they could manage. By the end of the first day, the schoolhouse roof had been properly patched, and by the third day, all the broken windows had been replaced. During these days of shared labor, Hannah learned more about Luke through observation than conversation. He was patient with her children, especially Thomas, who followed him like a shadow. He worked methodically and skillfully, with a perfectionism that suggested high standards for himself. And occasionally, when he thought no one was watching, a profound sadness would cross his face, particularly when observing Hannah with her children. On the fourth day, as they broke for lunch beneath the shade of an old oak tree beside the schoolhouse, Hannah finally gathered the courage to ask about his past. "Have you been in Council Bluffs long?" she began, keeping her tone casual as she handed him a sandwich. Luke accepted it with a nod of thanks. "About 8 years now, came through after the war, heading further west, but Mr. Reeves offered me work and I never left. And before the war, where was home?" A shadow crossed his face. "Virginia. Small town near Richmond." Hannah hesitated, sensing his reluctance but unable to curb her curiosity. "Do you have family there still?" Luke was silent for so long that Hannah thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was low, meant for her ears alone while the children played nearby with Miguel. "Had a wife and son, Caroline and James. Yellow fever took them both in '68 while I was still trying to rebuild our farm after the war." His eyes fixed on the horizon. "Couldn't stay after that, just rode west until the memories weren't so sharp." Hannah's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Luke." "I shouldn't have pried." He shook his head. "It's all right. Been 10 years now. Pain fades eventually." Hannah thought of James not with the sharp grief of recent loss, but with a complex mixture of affection for the man she'd married and regret for what their marriage had become. "Yes, it does. Though we carry them with us always." Luke's eyes met hers with sudden intensity. "Your husband, was it illness?" "Pneumonia," she confirmed. 2 years ago, though we'd lost him in other ways before that. The gambling took everything else first." She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but something about Luke invited confidence. He nodded, no judgment in his eyes. "Must have been hard, raising 3 children alone in the city." "It was," Hannah admitted. "Teaching positions for women with children are scarce in Philadelphia, and the ones available don't pay enough for a family to live on. When I saw the advertisement for Council Bluffs, offering housing along with the position, it seemed like Providence. Brave decision, coming so far." Hannah smiled ruefully. "Brave or desperate, sometimes they look the same." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the children's laughter as Miguel taught them a Spanish counting game. In that moment, Hannah felt a connection with Luke that transcended their brief acquaintance, 2 people who had endured loss and were still finding their way forward. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a wagon bearing Mayor Wilson and several town council members, come to inspect the progress. Their approval was effusive, with particular praise for Luke's craftsmanship. "You've worked wonders, Mr. Remington," one councilman declared. "The place hasn't looked this good in years." "Mrs. Kirkwood and the children deserve most of the credit," Luke replied, nodding toward Hannah. "They've worked from sunup to sundown without complaint." The pride in his voice warmed Hannah inexplicably. The mayor then announced that the town had decided to host a small gathering the following Saturday, a combination welcome party for Hannah and school preparation day, where families would come to ready the schoolroom for the term. "Nothing elaborate," Mayor Wilson assured Hannah, noting her uncertain expression. "Just a chance for you to meet the parents and children before classes begin. The ladies will bring food, the men will set up the desks, and everyone can see what a fine teacher we've secured for our youngsters." Hannah nodded her agreement, though inwardly she felt a flutter of anxiety. She'd been so focused on making the buildings habitable that she'd had little time to prepare for actually teaching. The schoolroom still lacked books, slates, and other essential supplies. As if reading her thoughts, the mayor added, "The supply shipment from Omaha should arrive tomorrow. Books, slates, chalk, maps, everything you requested in your letter, plus some additional items the council thought might be useful." Relief washed over her. "That's wonderful news, thank you." After the council members departed, work resumed with new energy. By sunset, the schoolhouse interior was transformed, floors scrubbed to a shine, walls freshly whitewashed, windows gleaming in the late afternoon light. All that remained was arranging the desks, setting up the teacher's platform, and organizing the supplies when they arrived. As Luke and Miguel prepared to leave for the day, Hannah approached Luke privately while the children showed Miguel their newly discovered collection of interesting rocks. "I wanted to thank you again," she said softly. "Not just for the work, but for being so good with the children, especially Thomas. He's missed having a man to look up to." Luke's expression was unreadable in the fading light. "They're good kids. You've raised them well." "Will you come to the gathering on Saturday?" Hannah asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Luke hesitated. "Not sure that's my place. I'm just the handyman." "You're more than that," Hannah said with sudden conviction. "You've been a friend when we needed one most." "The children would be disappointed if you weren't there, just the children." A voice whispered in her mind which Hannah firmly ignored. Luke studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "All right, for the children." The following days passed in a blur of activity. The supplies arrived as promised, and Hannah spent hours organizing the schoolroom exactly as she wanted it. Luke and Miguel finished the last of the repairs, including building a new set of steps for both the schoolhouse and cottage. By Friday evening, both buildings stood ready, the transformation complete. "Hard to believe it's the same place," Hannah marveled as they stood together in the schoolyard, admiring their work in the golden light of sunset. The children had gone inside to wash up for dinner, leaving the adults alone for a rare moment. "You've made it a home," Luke observed, his gaze taking in not just the buildings but the small touches Hannah had added: wildflowers in clay jars on the windowsills, a handmade wreath on the cottage door, the vegetable garden they'd started together at the side of the house. "We've made it a home," Hannah corrected him. "I couldn't have done this alone." Their eyes met, and Hannah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Over the past week, Lucas Remington had become more than just a helpful stranger. He was a man whose strength she admired, whose gentleness with her children touched her heart, and whose quiet companionship she had come to value more than she cared to admit. Luke took a step closer, his expression serious. "Hannah, Mama," Emma's voice called from the cottage door. Thomas spilled the water bucket all over the floor. The moment broken, Hannah gave Luke an apologetic smile. "Duty calls." He nodded, the unspoken words remaining between them as they walked back to the cottage together. Whatever Luke had been about to say would have to wait. Saturday dawned clear and warm, a perfect late August day for the community gathering. Hannah rose early, both excited and nervous about meeting the families whose children would soon be in her care. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white trim that she'd saved for special occasions, and helped the children into their Sunday clothes. "You look pretty, Mama," Sarah said as Hannah pinned up her chestnut hair, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. "Thank you, sweetheart. I want to make a good impression on everyone." "Including Luke," she added silently, then chided herself for the thought. The first families began arriving mid-morning, bringing food, flowers, and curious children eager to see their new teacher. Hannah greeted everyone warmly, memorizing names and family connections as best she could. The school-aged children ranged from 6 to 16, with varying levels of education, depending on how consistently the previous teacher had managed to hold classes. Mayor Wilson made a brief speech welcoming Hannah officially to the community and encouraging parents to ensure their children attended regularly. "Mrs. Kirkwood comes to us highly qualified, with experience teaching in Philadelphia's finest schools," he proclaimed, somewhat exaggerating her credentials. "Our children will benefit tremendously from her knowledge and dedication." Hannah blushed at the praise but stood tall, aware that these first impressions would set the tone for her authority as a teacher. Her own children mingled with their future classmates, Sarah already forming a friendship with the blacksmith's daughter, while Thomas engaged in a spirited marble game with several boys his age. Luke arrived an hour into the gathering, dressed in clean clothes with his dark hair neatly combed. He stood somewhat apart from the crowd, observing rather than participating until Emma spotted him and ran over to drag him into the festivities. "Mr. Remington needs cake, Mama," she announced, pulling him by the hand to where Hannah stood talking with the general store owner. Hannah smiled at the picture they made, tall, serious Luke being led by tiny, determined Emma. "I believe there's plenty at the dessert table, Emma. Why don't you show Mr. Remington where it is?" As Emma tugged Luke away, Mrs. Douglas appeared at Hannah's side. "That child has him wrapped around her finger already," she observed with a knowing smile. "Emma has that effect on people," Hannah replied lightly. "She's never known a stranger." "And what about you, Mrs. Kirkwood?" the older woman asked gently. "Has Luke Remington managed to work his way past your defenses as well?" Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Remington has been very helpful with the repairs. We're grateful for his assistance." Mrs. Douglas raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Well, he's a good man. Carries his burdens quietly, but carries them nonetheless. Nice to see him smiling these past days. Been a long time since that's happened regularly." Before Hannah could respond, a commotion near the road drew everyone's attention. A group of riders approached at speed, 5 rough-looking men, whose appearance immediately caused the atmosphere to shift from festive to tense. Sheriff Douglas moved to the front of the gathered townspeople, his hand resting near his holstered gun. "Trouble, Mrs." Douglas murmured, gently pulling Hannah a step back. The riders pulled to a stop at the edge of the schoolyard, dust billowing around them. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face partially hidden beneath a weathered hat, surveyed the crowd with cold eyes before fixing his gaze on the sheriff. "Afternoon, Douglas," he called, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "Quite the social gathering you've got here." "What do you want, Blackwell?" the sheriff replied evenly. "You're not welcome in Council Bluffs." Hannah's heart raced as she quickly gathered Emma and Thomas to her side. Sarah joined them a moment later, her young face serious as she sensed the tension. The man called Blackwell laughed, an unpleasant sound. "Just passing through. Thought we'd stop and pay our respects to the new schoolmarm we've been hearing about." His gaze shifted to Hannah, a slow, insolent perusal that made her skin crawl. She stiffened her spine and met his eyes steadily, refusing to show fear despite the alarm coursing through her. A shadow fell across Hannah as Luke stepped in front of her, his posture relaxed but alert. "You've paid them. Now move on, Blackwell. You've got no business here." Blackwell's expression hardened as he recognized Luke. "Remington. Still playing the righteous man, I see. How's that working out for you?" "Better than being a two-bit rustler," Luke replied evenly. "Sheriff's right. You're not welcome here." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds, the children and women of Council Bluffs drawing closer together while the men moved subtly to form a protective barrier. Hannah held her breath, one arm around Emma while keeping Thomas and Sarah close beside her. Finally, Blackwell spat on the ground. "Another time, then. We've got business elsewhere anyway." His cold eyes found Hannah's again over Luke's shoulder. "Welcome to the frontier, schoolmarm. Hope you enjoy the education." With that, the riders wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and unease in their wake. The festive mood had been punctured, though Mayor Wilson tried valiantly to restore it. "Let's not allow such ruffians to spoil our celebration," he called. "Mrs. Flores, I believe it's time for that special punch you brought." Gradually, the conversations resumed, though with a more subdued tone. Luke remained near Hannah and the children, his expression grim as he watched the distant riders disappear over a rise. "Who was that man?" Hannah asked quietly. "Jesse Blackwell," Luke replied, his voice tight. "Leads a gang that operates in the hills west of here, cattle rustling mainly, but they've been known to rob stage coaches and isolated homesteads." Fear coiled in Hannah's stomach. "And he knows about me, about the school." News travels fast out here, Luke said. But don't worry. The gang doesn't usually bother established towns too many armed men. They just wanted to cause trouble, remind folks they're around. Hannah wasn't reassured. He threatened me, warned me about getting an education. Luke's jaw tightened. It was just talk, trying to frighten you. Well, he succeeded, Hannah admitted, gathering Emma closer as the child leaned against her skirts, suddenly tired from the excitement. Luke's expression softened as he looked down at the family. I won't let anything happen to you or the children, he said, his voice low but fierce with conviction. None of us will. The sincerity in his eyes made Hannah believe him, despite the fear that still lingered. Thank you, she whispered. The gathering concluded earlier than planned, families departing with promises to return on Monday for the first day of school. As the last wagon pulled away, Hannah found herself alone with Luke and her children in the schoolyard. Will you stay for supper? She asked impulsively. To thank you for everything. It's nothing fancy, just a stew I prepared this morning. Luke hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. The meal was simple but satisfying, and as dusk fell, they sat on the cottage's small porch while the children played a quiet game inside. The evening air was cool, crickets beginning their nightly chorus as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Are you worried about Blackwell? Hannah asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Luke considered the question before answering. Not immediately. But I'll ride out to the Double R tonight and let Mr. Reeves know what happened. He has connections with lawmen throughout the territory. They've been trying to build a case against Blackwell's gang for months. Hannah nodded, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I've never seen such men before. In Philadelphia, danger wore different faces. The frontier attracts all kinds, Luke said. Good people looking for a fresh start, opportunists seeking easy fortunes, and men running from their past, either the law or their own demons. And which were you? Hannah asked softly, unable to help herself. Luke's profile was outlined against the twilight sky, strong and somehow vulnerable at the same time. The last, I suppose, running from memories I couldn't face. And now, he turned to look at her directly, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. Now I'm not so sure running is the answer. Maybe facing what life offers next is better than hiding from what came before. The weight of his words hung between them, full of unspoken meaning. Hannah's heart beat faster as Luke's gaze held hers, the connection between them almost tangible in the quiet evening inside the cottage. Emma's delighted laugh broke the moment. Luke stood, reaching for his hat. I should go. It's a long ride back to the ranch and you've got a big day Monday. Hannah rose as well, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. Will you come to town for the first day of school? The children would love to see you there. Just the children? Luke asked, his voice gentle. Hannah met his eyes steadily. No, not just the children. A smile touched his lips, warming his features. Then I'll be there. He hesitated, then reached out to briefly touch her hand, a gesture so simple yet so full of promise that Hannah felt it like a physical current between them. Good night, Hannah. Good night, Luke. Ride safely. She watched him mount his horse and ride away, remaining on the porch long after he'd disappeared into the gathering darkness. Something was happening between them, something unexpected but increasingly precious. Hannah had come west seeking security for her children, not romance for herself. Yet standing there in the cool evening air, she found herself hoping that perhaps, against all odds, she might find both. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the first day of school. Hannah woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She'd spent Sunday finalizing her lessons and organizing the classroom, determined to make a strong first impression on her students. The children sensed her anxiety, and were on their best behavior as they prepared for the day. Sarah helped Emma with her hair ribbon, while Thomas polished his shoes to a shine without being asked. As they walked the short distance from the cottage to the schoolhouse, Hannah's mind kept returning to Luke's promise to attend. Would he really ride all the way from the Double R just to see the school's opening? The answer came as they approached the schoolhouse. Luke's horse was already tethered to the hitching post, and he stood by the steps, dressed in clean clothes with his hat in his hands. The smile that lit Hannah's face at the sight of him came unbidden and unrestrained. "You came," she said simply as they reached him. "Said I would," he replied, his eyes warm as they took in her appearance. Hannah had worn her best teaching dress, a forest green with subtle trim that complemented her chestnut hair and brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Emma immediately claimed Luke's attention, showing him the slate and pencil she'd be using for the first time. Thomas proudly displayed his new reader, while Sarah, trying to seem more grown up, simply greeted him with a polite "Good morning, Mr. Remington." "The first families will be arriving soon," Hannah said, glancing down the road. "Would you like to see the classroom in its finished state? You haven't seen it since we arranged the desks and put up the maps." Luke nodded, following the family inside. The transformation was indeed remarkable. What had been a dusty, abandoned room was now a proper schoolhouse, with neat rows of desks facing the teacher's platform where Hannah's desk stood. Colorful maps adorned the walls, alongside a large slate board for demonstrations. Bookshelves held the precious volumes that had arrived from Omaha, and a small table in the corner displayed rock samples, dried flowers, and other natural curiosities the children had collected to start a science area. "It's perfect," Luke said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You've created something special here, Hannah." "We all did," she corrected him, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared accomplishment. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching wagons. Hannah smoothed her dress nervously. "That'll be the students. Wish me luck." "You don't need it," Luke assured her. "But good luck anyway." The next hour was a blur of activity as families arrived. Children were settled into desks according to age and ability, and parents said their goodbyes with varying degrees of emotion. Hannah moved among them with growing confidence, welcoming each child by name thanks to her careful memorization at Saturday's gathering. When all 23 students were seated, ranging from 6-year-old beginners to teenagers completing their education, Hannah took her place at the front of the room. Luke had positioned himself at the back, watching with quiet pride as Hannah rang the school bell newly repaired, and Raccoon free to officially commence the school year. Her voice, clear and confident, carried through the room as she welcomed the children and outlined her expectations for their time together. "In this room, we will learn not just reading, writing, and arithmetic," she told them, "but how to think, how to question, and how to grow into the people you are meant to become. I expect your best effort, your respect for one another, and your curiosity about the world around you." As Hannah continued her opening address, Luke studied her with growing admiration. This was a different Hannah from the uncertain woman who had stepped off the stagecoach just 2 weeks ago. Here was a woman in her element, confident, passionate, and clearly gifted at her chosen profession. The children sensed it too, their attention fixed on their new teacher with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect. When Hannah dismissed the students for their mid-morning recess, Luke slipped outside, not wanting to disrupt her first day. He was preparing to mount his horse when Hannah emerged from the schoolhouse. "Leaving already?" she asked, a note of disappointment in her voice. "Didn't want to be in the way," Luke explained. "You seem to have everything well in hand." Hannah smiled, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. I think it's going well. The children seem eager to learn, even the older boys I was worried might resent a female teacher. That's because you've earned their respect, Luke said, even in such a short time. Hannah glanced back at the schoolyard where her own children were integrating with their new classmates. Sarah already organizing a game while Thomas and Emma participated enthusiastically. "They're settling in better than I dared hope," she said softly. "This move was a risk, but seeing them now, I think it was the right decision." Luke nodded, following her gaze. "Council Bluffs is lucky to have you, all of you." Hannah turned back to him, her expression suddenly serious. "Luke, I wanted to ask you something. About Saturday with those men Blackwell's gang. You seem to have some history with them." Luke's jaw tightened. "Not directly, but they've caused trouble for the Double R before, rustled some cattle last spring, threatened one of our hands who caught them at it." "That's all," Hannah pressed gently. "It seemed personal." Luke was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. "Blackwell reminds me of men I've known before. Men who take what they want without regard for who gets hurt. During the war, after. I've seen too many of his kind." The haunted look was back in his eyes, and Hannah instinctively reached out to touch his arm. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry into painful memories." Luke covered her hand with his own, the touch sending warmth through her despite the serious conversation. "It's all right. Some memories need to be faced, not buried. Maybe that's part of moving forward." The school bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Hannah reluctantly withdrew her hand. "I should get back to my students." Luke nodded, settling his hat on his head. "I've got ranch business in town later this week." "May I stop by, see how the first days are going?" "I'd like that," Hannah replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Perhaps Thursday. The children and I are usually home from school by 4. "Thursday," Luke agreed with a smile that transformed his serious face. "Until then, schoolmarm." As he rode away, Hannah found herself watching until he disappeared from view, a now familiar flutter in her chest. Turning back to the schoolhouse, she forced herself to focus on the day ahead. Though thoughts of Lucas Remington's promised visit on Thursday lingered pleasantly at the edges of her mind. The first few days of school passed in a whirl of activity as Hannah established routines, assessed her students' varying levels of knowledge, and adjusted her teaching plans accordingly. By Thursday afternoon, she felt a growing confidence in her ability to manage the diverse classroom. The younger children adored her, while the older students, initially skeptical of the city teacher, were beginning to appreciate her thorough knowledge and fair approach. As Hannah and her children walked home from the schoolhouse, she found herself glancing frequently down the road from town, anticipating Luke's visit with an eagerness that both thrilled and concerned her. Was she being foolish, allowing herself to develop feelings for a man she barely knew? Yet in the Frontier's condensed timeline, 2 weeks of working side by side had created a connection that felt deeper than mere acquaintance. "Mama, is Mr. Remington coming today?" Emma asked, skipping alongside her as they approached the cottage. "He said he might if his business in town allowed," Hannah replied, trying to keep her tone casual. "But we shouldn't count on it, sweetheart." "I hope he comes," Emma declared. "I want to show him my spelling words. I got them all right today." Sarah exchanged a knowing look with her mother. At 10, she was old enough to recognize the growing attachment between Hannah and Luke, though thankfully she seemed to approve. Thomas, absorbed in a new marble game he'd learned from his classmates, was less aware of the budding relationship, though he too had taken a strong liking to Luke. They had just reached the cottage when the sound of hoofbeats announced a rider approaching. Hannah's heart quickened as Luke came into view, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies in addition to his own mount. "Mr. Remington," Emma called, running to meet him with her slate held high. "I did all my spelling words." Luke dismounted with easy grace, handing his reins to Thomas, who beamed at being entrusted with the horse. "Did you now? Let's see this impressive work." As Luke examined Emma's slate with exaggerated seriousness, Hannah found herself studying him the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, the gentle way he knelt to Emma's level despite his tall frame. Something warm and unexpected blossomed in her chest at the sight. "I brought some things from town," Luke said as he straightened, addressing Hannah. "Mrs. Douglas mentioned you were in need of a few items for the cottage that weren't included in the initial supplies." Hannah was touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's very kind of you, Luke. You didn't need to go to such trouble." "No trouble," he assured her, beginning to unload the packhorse. "Mr. Reeves sends some things as well, a welcome gift from the Double R." The few items turned out to be a generous assortment. A proper rocking chair for the cottage porch, cooking utensils Hannah had mentioned needing, fabric for new curtains, a set of books for the children, and most surprisingly a small crate of apple saplings. "For your garden," Luke explained as Hannah examined the young trees with delight. "They'll take a few years to fruit properly, but Mr. Reeves thought you might like to plant something that would grow along with your time here." The symbolism wasn't lost on Hannah. These trees represented putting down roots, a commitment to staying. The gesture moved her deeply. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Hannah felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither had yet voiced aloud. The moment was broken by Thomas's excited voice. "Can we plant them right now, Mama? Mr. Remington can show us how." Luke chuckled. "We'd need to prepare the ground properly first, young man. But if your mother approves, I could come on Saturday to help with the planting." "Saturday would be wonderful," Hannah agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly judging by the knowing smile that tugged at Luke's lips. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly as Luke helped set up the rocking chair on the porch, the children chattering away about their school experiences. When Hannah invited him to stay for supper, he accepted without the hesitation he'd shown the first time. As dusk approached and the meal concluded, Hannah sent the children to prepare for bed while she and Luke sat on the porch, the new rocking chair creaking gently as Hannah swayed. The evening air was cool but not cold, the prairie stretching out before them bathed in the golden light of sunset. "You seem settled already," Luke observed. "As if you've been teaching here for years, not days." Hannah smiled, pleased by the observation. "It feels right being here. The children are adapting better than I hoped, even Sarah, who I worried would miss city life the most." "And you? Do you miss Philadelphia?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries,